Hello there, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us in this session, Access for All, especially for women and girls. My name is Julie Perkins, and I'm the officer in charge for UN Habitat's GWOPA Secretariat here in Bonn, Germany. And this is the very first thematic session in this global WOPS Congress that's beginning today and taking place over the next 2 weeks with over 30 sessions, which you can join either live or in a recorded manner after the fact. Just a bit about us. Here at UN Habitat hosted GWOPA, we focus on local and public water and sanitation service providers who are, arguably the most critical actors for achieving universal access goals. Our work is based on the insight that peer operators are in a very unique and privileged position to learn from one another and to co-create solutions to the challenges that they face. And they're often very capable and motivated to support one another on a not-for-profit basis. In that spirit, we've tried to make this Congress interactive. And so first, you should know that you may listen in English, French, or Spanish. Interpretation is on the top of the chat on the right-hand side. And you may comment and ask questions in the chat on the right-hand side. Please sign in. If you're doing this for the first time, you're encouraged to do so with your social media account or email and not anonymously, please. When discussion is happening, the moderator might also invite you to request to speak at the bottom where indicated. And please also note that there are resources in the session page. Feel free to introduce yourself on the peer board and Congress lobby. And with no further ado, let me now hand over to Dr. Anne Lestrade. Anne has 2 master's degrees and a PhD in geopolitics, and she's a research fellow at NYU. She's been playing actually a significant role in the preparation of this Congress, and we've been really happy to work with her on this. As the chairwoman of Eau de Paris and the deputy mayor of Paris for 13 years, she led an overall revamping of the water policy there, including the creation of the largest public-owned water operator in France. Over to you, Anne. Enjoy the session.
Okay, thank you very much, Julie, for this kind introduction. And thank you again for all the preparation of this very important Congress. And congratulations to all the GWOPA team. So good morning and good afternoon to everyone. The first session is a very important one because we decided to focus on access for all and in particular for women and girls. And the goals and challenges concerning access to water and sanitation were recalled at the opening session. And our command agenda objectives were presented, include leave no one behind and place women and girls at the center. However, there is a big gap between the rallying cry of leave no one behind and the reality of access to water and sanitation on the ground. Vulnerable groups continue to be the hardest to reach and the last to be served, and especially women and girls. And how we can place women and girls at the center of policy, and what can human rights advocates, grassroots NGOs, and service providers teach us and each other to bridge this gap between ambition and reality? So in this session, we wanted to have a big diversity of speakers from civil society, operators, special rapporteur, and we are very honored to have the former and the current special rapporteur, and trade unions as well. So we can have the opportunity to discuss this important topic with different kind of backgrounds and point of view. So we are very honored to have interesting speakers, and I want to introduce them right now. So Pedro Arrojo-Agudo, the Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights to Water and Sanitation. Sareen Malik, Executive Secretary of the African Civil Society Network for Water and Sanitation and Vice Chair Steering Committee of Sanitation Water Alliance Partnership. Leo Heller, former Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights to Water and Sanitation, Minazola Amiantwadi, Head of International Project of La Société Wallonne des Eaux, and Karina Alejandra Navone, a lawyer in the Direction of Legal Affairs, and the Sindicato Gran Buenauser de Trabajadores de Obras Sanitarias. I'm really sorry for my Spanish. I never learned Spanish. Yes. Sorry for that. In AISA company in Buenos Aires, and Elida Villalba Vargas. And thank you very much to be the moderator and a speaker as well. So she's a lawyer, and she just defended her PhD dissertation with the topic community water management and the access to water and sanitation as human rights in rural and peri-urban areas. So thank you very much again for your participation. And now, please, Elida, I give you the floor to moderate this panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the organization of this very important Congress. It's my first time being here on the GWOPA Congress, and it's for me an honor, especially to share with you the floor. And also, I celebrate the initiative to have this important topic at the very beginning of the Congress. Talking about the access to water to all, especially women and girls, is really important to address the human right to water. I don't know if I will give the floor to everyone. I think you can have 7 or 10 minutes to express yourself here, and then we will start a discussion. I prepared some questions. This seems for me relevant to discuss with you all. I don't know if you want to start, Karina, as you mentioned, you are leaving after a while, and let's start with you, please.
Ok, muchísimas gracias. Buenos días a todas y a todos. Buenos días desde Buenos Aires, desde Argentina. Sé que para muchos de ustedes ya es la tarde. Bueno, mi nombre es Karina Navone, soy la secretaria de Género e Igualdad de Oportunidades del Sindicato Gran Buenos Aires de Trabajadores de Obras Sanitarias. Es un sindicato que representa de manera directa a aproximadamente 9.000 trabajadoras y trabajadores que se desempeñan en la actividad de brindar agua potable y saneamiento cloacal a la población de la ciudad autónoma de Buenos Aires, en Argentina, y a los 26 partidos del conurbano bonaerense, de las afueras. Una región estratégica de la Argentina y una de las zonas más densamente pobladas del continente. Les voy a dar un pequeño pantallazo de cómo es la ubicación estructural de nuestro gremio. Nuestro gremio forma parte de la Federación Nacional de Trabajadores del Agua y el Saneamiento, que nuclea a todos los gremios de la actividad a lo largo y ancho de nuestro país, representando a más de 30.000 trabajadoras y trabajadores. Todas las federaciones, a su vez, nos nucleamos a nivel nacional en nuestra central sindical, que es la Confederación General del Trabajo. Y a nivel internacional estamos afiliados activamente a la Internacional de Servicios Públicos, la ISP, siguiendo sus lineamientos de luchar por servicios públicos de calidad para todas las poblaciones del mundo. En este espacio me toca coordinar a nivel nacional el Comité de Mujeres de Argentina de la ISP. A nivel de Latinoamérica, nuestro gremio forma parte de la Confederación de Trabajadores del Agua y Saneamiento de las Américas. Nuestra organización se encuentra presidida por el compañero José Luis Lingeri, un líder con una mirada estratégica que creó esta Secretaría de Género que presido con la finalidad de afianzar y aumentar la participación femenina de manera interna hacia nuestra organización, para lograr la igualdad de oportunidades entre mujeres y hombres trabajadores en una actividad tan históricamente masculinizada como lo es la nuestra. Hoy además Tenemos al frente de la empresa AISA, donde nuestro sindicato participa de su gestión a través de un director obrero sentado en la mesa del directorio, a una mujer, la compañera Malena Galmarini. Esto también suma un enorme impulso a todo lo que hace a la participación de mujeres en pie de igualdad, a todo aquello que venimos trabajando desde nuestro sindicato, aún en gestiones anteriores, desde hace más de 8 años. Pero además, la visión y el compromiso de este líder y con él, de quienes lo acompañamos en la gestión, es llevar esta igualdad de oportunidades hacia afuera, hacia la sociedad y hacia el mundo. ¿Cómo lo hacemos? Desde hace años venimos luchando porque el acceso al agua potable y el saneamiento sean considerados un derecho humano fundamental, que lo es, porque creemos fervientemente que el acceso a estos servicios básicos de calidad son un factor de igualación social, por excelencia, porque nadie puede realizarse si no tiene acceso al agua. Es el bien fundamental del cual dependemos para la vida. En este camino, en el año 2015, creamos una entidad de bien público llamada Fundación de los Trabajadores Sanitaristas para la Formación y el Desarrollo, que preside nuestro secretario, y uno de sus objetivos es la promoción y la defensa de los valores ambientales. Esta fundación organizó los foros del derecho humano al agua que se realizaron en Roma, en Bogotá y en Buenos Aires, con la participación y la presencia de su santidad, el Papa Francisco. En el marco de esta fundación, creamos también la Universidad del Agua, una institución educativa que brindará formación a los futuros cuadros y profesionales sanitaristas. ¿Por qué hacemos todo esto? ¿Qué vinculación tiene con el género? Pues de cara al acceso al agua potable, como a otros servicios públicos esenciales, cuando no los tenemos, debemos reconocer que existen enormes impactos diferenciados. Los efectos de la falta de servicios públicos básicos afectan a países en todo el planeta y a sus habitantes, pero su impacto se distribuye de modo desigual. Las personas más vulnerables son aquellas más desfavorecidas en múltiples términos: económicos, sociales, culturales, políticos. Las mujeres y las niñas y niños son mayoría entre estos colectivos y como tales, ellas y ellos sufren de primera mano y de forma acentuada los efectos de no tener agua segura para beber, de no tener luz o gas para cocinar. Son mayormente las mujeres y las niñas las que dedican una cantidad desproporcionada de su tiempo a buscar y acarrear el agua, los alimentos y el combustible para proveer a sus familias. La tarea de recogida de biomasa y de agua, allí donde no existe distribución de agua potable, recae sobre todo en mujeres y niños, que pueden dedicar más de 20 horas semanales a buscar y acarrear el agua, y otras tantas a recoger madera y aún más horas para cocinar en hornos ineficientes. Como resultado, tienen menos tiempo para estudiar, para participar en otras actividades o simplemente para descansar. La escasez de agua potable y de saneamiento es la causa principal de enfermedades en el mundo, y unos 4.500 niños y niñas mueren a diario por carecer de agua potable y de instalaciones básicas de saneamiento. Otros muchos padecen mala salud, su rendimiento se ha visto disminuido y han perdido la oportunidad de recibir educación. Y aquí también, en la falta de acceso al agua, vemos un marcado componente de discriminación de género. Por esto que dijimos, ¿no?, que son normalmente las mujeres y las niñas quienes se encargan de conseguir el agua para las familias. En los países en vía de desarrollo caminan entre 6 y 7 kilómetros al día, transportando más de 20 litros de agua en sus espaldas, en sus cabezas, lo que reduce de manera considerable este tiempo que ellas podrían utilizar para otro trabajo. Las mujeres que sufren la falta de agua les causa abortos e infecciones, problemas en el parto, indefección y problemas de espalda. El consumo de agua contaminada puede ser, entre otras cosas, el responsable de abortos espontáneos debido a fuertes infecciones. La falta de higiene durante la menstruación también trae aparejados muchos problemas. Ni que hablar del rol fundamental que ha ocupado el acceso al agua potable frente a la pandemia del COVID-19. La escasez de fuentes cercanas obliga a las mujeres a realizar grandes desplazamientos, a menudo para llegar a los pozos que no se encuentran cerca de las poblaciones y de los asentamientos. Los problemas generados por esta escasez hídrica suelen tener también esta implicancia de problemas en las espaldas, por ejemplo, problemas físicos en las mujeres, pero además problemas relacionados con la violencia, porque muchas veces en el camino a buscar el agua, ellas tienen que ir solas o con niñas y sufren acoso o violaciones, incluso en este trayecto. La UNESCO estima que las 2/3 partes de los niños que no van a la escuela son niñas, mujeres, y que 1 de 4 mujeres jóvenes en países en desarrollo no han completado la primaria, lo que perpetúa este ciclo de marginación. Esto está relacionado con lo que llamamos la feminización de la pobreza. Como ustedes pueden ver ahora claramente con cifras, el impacto diferenciado de cara a la falta de acceso a servicios esenciales, y entre ellos el agua, es enorme. Por este motivo, las políticas hídricas y las políticas de género deben estar relacionadas en todos los países del mundo. Ellas no solo serían más efectivas si tuvieran en consideración los aspectos de género, sino que impulsarían una mayor equidad. Para culminar, la representación femenina en estos temas, en pie de igualdad con nuestros compañeros hombres, es esencial. Es necesario reclamar y fomentar la participación activa de la mujer y proponer e incidir en nuestros países en todos los ámbitos por políticas hídricas universales e inclusivas. Y en estas discusiones, los sindicatos, las organizaciones representativas de las y los trabajadores, tenemos que estar presentes de manera activa, a la vanguardia. Tenemos un rol fundamental. Debemos ser agentes de transformación, de propagación de una cultura de la equidad y sostenible. El verdadero cambio hacia una sociedad más justa es con nosotras y con nosotros, los trabajadores. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Karina. Thank you very much for your very, very interesting participation. Now I would like to give the floor to Pedro Arrojo-Agudo. Please.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you, the organizers, and very particularly Andestrat for this invitation, and all of you for your attention. As I explained in my first thematic report presented to the Human Rights Council, and as I have highlighted at the opening ceremony of this Congress, we face an unprecedented paradoxical challenge. The global water crisis on the water planet, the blue planet, with 2.2 billion people without guaranteed access to safe drinking water. Indeed, ongoing climate change with its increasingly severe droughts threatens even the habitability of arid territories on all continents. But with this important exception, the vast majority of these 2.2 billion people are not properly thirsty people without water in their living environment, but impoverished people living next to polluted rivers, springs, or aquifers. If we are to ensure that they have accessible and affordable drinking water for all, we need to restore the health of the rivers and aquifers from which they draw their water on a daily basis. We must make, I used to say this expression, we must make peace with our rivers. Thus, the human right to safe drinking water and the human right to sanitation are linked to the challenge of restoring the health of our aquatic ecosystems as an essential part of the recently recognized human right to a healthy environment. Well, regarding SDG 6, these goal conditions, as we know, the fulfillment of a large part of the other SDGs. We are halfway to the deadline we gave ourselves in the international community, and we are barely a quarter of the way there. So we can meet this target, yes. And indeed, with the pandemic, it is clear that we need to meet it more than ever, no? But we need to accelerate the pace. For this, I propose to take into account two main keys. First of all, taking on this challenge as a democratic challenge and not as a business, dedicating a significant part of the public funds available for post-pandemic socioeconomic recovery, and second, empowering women in the development of these human rights, particularly in impoverished communities. As we all know, among the billions impoverished people without access, guaranteed access to safe drinking water and or without basic sanitation, it is women and girls who, on the one hand, you have said before, on the one hand, bear the responsibility for bringing water to the household, and who, on the other hand, are most at risk of violence, and in particular rape, because they do not have safe sanitation facilities. They are, and on the other hand, they are the girls who cannot go to school because they have to fetch water, or because they do not have adequate facilities and means to ensure their menstrual health. Therefore, they are undoubtedly, and this is very important for me, they are undoubtedly the ones who, assuming greater responsibilities, are also the ones most interested in accelerating the pace in the fulfillment of SDG 6. Regarding the other key issue, that of overcoming the so-called financial gap, due to lack of public funds, we need to reflect seriously. In 2008, the strategy of the misnamed austerity left all countries without public funds to meet vital needs, under the priority of saving the banks, even though they were responsible for the crisis. Today, however, the strategy adopted is completely different, both to deal with the pandemic and also with socioeconomic recovery. In fact, substantial public funds are available to develop what we call the Green New Deal of the 21st century. The key question is, do we consider it necessary to strengthen our public health system as a fundamental axis of this socioeconomic recovery? The social consensus on this is overwhelming across Europe and across the world as a public investment effort, not for profit, leaving no one behind, as a truly global democratic challenge. In this context, it will be necessary to pay special attention to impoverished rural areas neglected by the state very often, recognizing and supporting in particular the community-based services that the population in many cases promotes from the logic of water as a common good and the need of water and sanitation for all as an expression of democratic governance in the most difficult conditions. And by the way, speaking of democratic water governance, we must not forget that women and girls make up 50%, even more, of the population, although they certainly bear a large part of the responsibility for water and sanitation, precisely in villages and communities where there are more problems in fulfilling human rights. Well, next year, my two reports, thematic reports, will be on human right to safe drinking water and sanitation for indigenous peoples, and the other one for peasant or rural communities, impoverished rural communities. And in both reports, I will take one of the main approaches, the main axes to observe and to develop the reality and the role of women and girls are doing. It will be one of the central focuses of my report. So, well, thank you very much.
Thank you to you, Pedro Arrojo-Agudo. It was a pleasure to hear you. And now I would like to give the floor to Sareen, Malik. Gallen, please.
Okay, I'm not sure what those emojis are, but anyway. Nervously, attempting not to touch my screen. Anyway, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, wherever you are. My name is Sareen Malik, Executive Secretary for the African Civil Society Network for Water and Sanitation, ANEW, and SWA Vice Chair. It is a pleasure to be amongst you over here, really discussing a topic that forms part of parcel of our strategy and of our passion, which is the issue of women and girls. And that we hope, even from here, that this is the kickoff as well to the Africa Water Week, Africa Sun, where we hope to have an entire session really dedicated to women and girls. So today, in preparation for this meeting and within other programs, we went for a transect walk in Kibera. I'm currently in Kenya. Kibera, as you know, is the largest informal settlement in sub-Sahara Africa. And we went to take a look at, hear a bit what the women have to say, but also it is part of a program that is also known as Sex for Water or Sextortion within the water sector, which was discovered in 2015. And a number of investigations have taken place over the last couple of years. Investigations equally done by SIWI in Colombia and South Africa, where we had uncovered that women were trading sex for a basic commodity like water. We've had it for pads, we've had it for grades, we're hearing it for all kinds of things, but this came up for water. So I'd like to do things a bit differently. We collected some stories from some of these girls and some of these women, and today I'd like to share, with her permission, her name is Mwikali, her story in terms of what has happened to her. So please bear with me. My name is Mwikali. I am a Form 2 female student at X Primary School. I used to live in a village called Laini Saba in Kibera. My mother used to hawk oranges in our market, Makutano Junction, every day. Water has been scarce in our area, and we would walk long distances to the water point and experience very long queues. I have to fetch water before going to school. This means that I had to wake up as early as 3 a.m. to walk to the water point, which was 10 minutes away from our house or 300 meters away. Once I get to this water point, I queue for 3 hours before it gets to my turn. I wake up so early because by 6 a.m. water is no longer available. So those who've missed it take their jerry cans back to their houses. I always fetch water because my mother is too weak to queue and carry water to the house, though she helps me with other duties. We had no water for about 3 days. On the third day, signs of water were observed in the evening. Everyone promised to wake up as early as possible to go fetch this water. My friend Esther and I agreed to wake up at 2 a.m. ahead of everyone. While on our way to the water point, we were held at gunpoint by young men who demanded to have sex or they would kill us. I got so tense and did not know what to do. My friend agreed to the idea because she feared death. I managed to fight them off and to escape and call for help. I was able to attract people who came to our rescue. They held my hand and a woman brought me into her arms, asking me what the problem was. I screamed, "Esther, Esther, please help Esther. She's been taken into the corner." They came running to the corner and, of course, shocked at what they saw. 2 men were strangling my friend and trying to get on top of her. She was lucky. They managed to run away upon the arrival of our neighbors. We were taken to the hospital for checkup because women asked questions that we did not understand, for example, and we were taken to the counseling center for mental health and wellness. It worked for some times, but I've never wanted to mix with men in any setup. With time, I learned to accept and move on. These guys were eventually punished, 2 years each in jail. When they got out of prison, they were already reformed, as they say. And as we speak today, they are champions who fight for the rights of women and girls in the slums. Personally, and to be honest, I can't take myself or bring myself to even look at them or speak to them, as my heart has never allowed me to do so. This is just one of the 25 stories that we collected. I chose to read you this one because they get extremely graphic, a lot of violence. They address the issues of sex for water. They address the issue, as Pedro has mentioned, assault at water points. Now, what have we learned as working within an informal settlement? Within the program, we set up, of course, the traditional activities, awareness raising, having meetings with policymakers and decision makers, reviewing the different policies to see if they're gender responsive, but we equally added psychosocial support, which means we contracted a number of counselors and women leaders and coaches to actually receive these women. One of the NGOs that is working over there set up their space in what is known as the safe space. We set up numbers, gave them out into the informal settlement to let women know that if they have been cases for sextortion, rape, assault, to come to us first and get frontline advice, seek counsel, and also set up what we are known as legal clinics that we are going to be rolling out and have already started rolling out. Now, the other thing that we noticed when we did the Transit walk again in Kibera on Saturday morning, the queues were horribly long. The women had been waiting there since 5 o'clock in the morning. We were there at 8:39. And looking closely at those queues, there was a sense that as practitioners, we are not seeing. Are we not seeing or feeling enough the pain points which is right in front of us? Yes, the most obvious pain point is that there's no access to water or it's unpredictable, which was the case in Kibera, because we sat with those women from 8:30 to 12:30 and counted how many times the water actually came in. Once. Needless to say, the mob that was around when this water was actually coming in. Number two, the setup. While best efforts of formal service providers, there is still the informal service providers to contend with. And to be honest, it is coming to a harsh reality that they actually need to be integrated somehow within the programs that we are working with. Because even if we have the utility having the best efforts to try and connect a mud hut, if the informal service provider is still there, the community is too fearful, those pipes will be vandalized. I can assure you that. So the question here is, it's in terms of what are we doing in terms of having hardware and software approaches that respond to these particular pain points. And this one in particular is, how do we cut the queue? How do we remove the woman from the queue? Let her wait in her house for that water if she needs to. Let her not be exposed to the vendors, to the jerry cans, to the youth, to the young men or women that prey on these women, knowing fully well that they're all going to the water point. Having schoolgirls coming out at 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning to go and fetch water. Because as Pedro mentioned, that is known to be as their primary duty. We have talked about participation, we have talked about legislation. Legislation as well is an issue. For example, in Kenya, sextortion is not recognized as a form of corruption. Sextortion actually is not recognized in any of the legislation. Kenya does have very good legislation in place against sexual offenses, against corruption, against bribery. But this little term, sextortion, actually has not made it there. And this is something as well that we would be looking at to push forward. So what has been the most powerful intervention to date? And it was the least likely one, which was actually the psychological support that was being provided to these women. Now, when we spoke to the counselors that very Saturday morning, they had already had about 15 women that had come in. Some to report on the issues of violence, some who have experienced violence that need counseling and help, who are too demoralized and hopeless to try and take legal recourse, against their perpetrators or too fearful to do so. But the other interesting part was that there were some women that came just to seek counseling, to deal with the burden of poverty, to deal with the burden of really being marginalized and really not being invisible. And we found, because we've been running these counseling services for the past couple of months, that empowering these women within their livelihoods, within their self-esteem, increasing their amour propre, if we can say, is actually helping in positioning them to better demand and claim for their rights. Because we are building confidence, we are trying to build resilience in these women. We're trying to let them know this is not acceptable. Because we ask the question, how do you accept this in this day and age at the eve of elections? How do you still accept to live like this, to be treated like this? Why do you not meet us halfway? And again, the shadow or the sadness that passes, the confidence is not there. So actually, these clinics, whether the psychosocial support clinics, the legal clinics, have been the ones that have been very instrumental in this program in terms of getting the women to start fighting back. So that is what I wanted to share with you today in terms of the experience that we collected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sareen. And I was looking for the precise word to describe this story, and I'm speechless.
Yeah.
It's really impressive, and I congratulate you for this amazing
Thank
job
you.
you are doing. Oh, for
Thank
sure,
you.
water is connected with so many other things, and I think we will develop more this topic for a while.
Thank
Now
you.
I would like to give the floor.
I did not do that.
No, it was Pedro Arrojo. But congratulations. Now I would like to give the floor to Leo Heller, and we are looking forward to hearing him here.
Thank you, Elida. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. First of all, I would like to congratulate GWOPA for choosing the theme of gender equality for the first main session of the Congress. I think it was a very happy choice and nice choice, because it's important to think on the provision of services based on this issue of gender equality. I published in 2016 and presented to the Human Rights Council a specific thematic report on the issue. And I need to say that when I first decided to prepare this report, the first image that came to my mind was the traditional image of women and girls fetching water and carrying water. And then when I started to go more in depth and talk to women associations and NGOs and academics, several other elements came to my mind, and I could see that this first image is only maybe the tip of the iceberg of the problem, because there are several important and key dimensions to be addressed when we talk about gender equality in the context of the human rights to water and sanitation. Of course, several of these elements were already addressed today by the previous speakers, but I wanted to highlight a few aspects of this association between gender equality and the human rights to water and sanitation. A first aspect is the importance of addressing gender inequality across the life cycle of a woman, because it's different when we think on the stage of the infancy of a woman, a girl, because there are some issues related, for instance, to water quality, the same standards of water quality when we look particularly to a very young baby girl. It has a different impact in terms of toxicity and impacts on health, and other types of impacts of the health. Then when we think on the puberty and the very key issue of school drop due to the menstruation cycle, but also when the girl helps the mother and the father to carry water, and how it relates to the presence to the schools, but and also the several other stages of the life cycle, ending in the old age, where the old women are not allowed in the decision making and they have specific needs, for instance, to use a toilet. So this is the first issue. Another issue is how to address gender inequality across rights. When we think on the violation of the right to water and the right to sanitation, we need to think on the violation of other rights. So the interrelationship and the interdependence between rights. So the right to health, the right to housing, the right to education, the right to food are very inextricably linked to the violation of the right to water and the right to sanitation by women and girls. Another element is to think on gender inequality across the gender spectrum. It's not only to think on women and men, but also to think on people that are gender non-conforming, for instance, transgender, and the access to toilets in public spaces, in the workplace, in the schools, and how to address these in a rights-based approach. So for me, this is very important, and it's very common. And I saw that in some of my country missions, for instance, in Malaysia, how when you don't address this clearly in a transparent way, there can be cases of exclusion, humiliation, violence that are unacceptable from the point of view of the human rights. Another issue is related to legal barriers in addressing gender equality or gender inequality in the legal instruments. And the issue here is that most of the laws are proud to be gender neutral. And in my perspective, to be gender neutral can be a way to discrimination. So it's not a question to be neutral in terms of gender approach in this legislation, but mainly to address women, girls, and non-conforming gender persons as subject of different rights and different needs. So the legal approach need to consider clearly those different needs. Another issue is the issue of intersectionality and multiple forms of discrimination against women, girls, and non-conforming persons, because and this is not so common to address. So for me, it's very key to think that the discrimination based on gender when is associated with other types or other dimensions of discrimination, we can say other layers of discrimination, such as disability, profession, marital status, caste, age, has interceptions that exacerbate the level of discrimination by gender. So for me, it's very important. There is a body of literature that are addressing intersectionality. And for me, it's very important to appropriate this literature in the field of water and sanitation. Not necessarily this literature is related to water and sanitation, but for me, it's very important, and it's very key to think on how discrimination based on gender in water and sanitation can be associated to other levels and layers of discrimination. And last but not least, the issue of participation. This is a very key part of my report. And my thinking here is that when we think on women participation in different spaces of participation, this is not only a question of numeric counting. So it's not only an issue to have a space, an equal space for women and men to participate in decision, but also to really hear the voices of women in terms of influencing decisions, in terms of voicing their needs, in terms of making individual choices, and in terms of controlling their own lives. So this is not common in the water and sanitation sector. Someone previously said that, I think it was the first speaker, that this sector is very man-influenced sector, and I agree with that. We can see the engineers, the managers, and also the professionals that are on the fields are mainly men. But when man is deciding, or for instance, designing a toilet, and it's usually the particular needs of women and girls are not really considered. So participation is very key, because our genuine participation by women and girls in the forum of decision making will certainly contribute to see the particular needs and reflect these particular needs of this important part of the population reflected on policies, designing, planning, etc., etc. So I'll stop here, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Leo Heller, for bringing us so many concepts that I already prepared for discussing after in this session. For instance, democracy, participation, but democracy in the means of substantive democracy, not just the democracy in the that convert us a voter in election time, no? And also you are bringing us the intersectionality. The thing is a key concept to be discussed this afternoon. Now I will glad to give the floor to Minasola Miantoadi. Please, Minasola.
Merci beaucoup à Elida. En tout cas, félicitations pour l'organisation de ce congrès. Bonsoir à tous et bonjour à tous aussi. Merci de pouvoir donner l'opportunité à un opérateur de pouvoir dégager un petit peu ou proposer un petit peu, voilà, partager avec vous comment nous contribuons à promouvoir l'accès à l'eau, à fournir l'accès à l'eau, apporter un peu notre pierre à l'édifice de ce programme, en tout cas de cet aspect qui est très, très crucial et qui est très, très important. Voilà, je vais d'abord présenter un petit peu la Société Wallonne des Eaux et puis vous dire un petit peu comment nous, voilà, point de vue l'opérateur, nous essayons de contribuer à cet engagement qui est l'accès à l'eau et surtout les hommes, les femmes et les filles. Nous sommes un opérateur d'eau en Belgique, au sud de la Belgique. Nous fournissons de l'eau potable à plus ou moins 70% donc, de la population au sud de la Belgique. Donc, nous sommes un opérateur important, public, dans le domaine de l'eau. Nous sommes un opérateur européen, aussi où nous jouons quand même un rôle relativement important avec les autres acteurs au niveau de l'Europe dans l'eau. Notre stratégie, en fait, s'articule autour de 3 piliers qui sont donc l'accès à l'eau, mais pas seulement l'accès tout simplement à l'eau, mais à un tarif qui est soutenable pour les ménages. Mais également investir dans tout ce qui est pérennité de nos infrastructures, parce que c'est très important pour que ce soit viable. Et troisième pilier, c'est pouvoir contribuer à une gestion des ressources durables. Et c'est très important dans ce contexte de changement climatique. Alors, comment nous pouvons justement contribuer, notre engagement international peut contribuer, nos actions peuvent contribuer à cet accès à l'eau? Alors, nous savons que l'eau potable et propre est vraiment essentielle à la vie humaine. Nos interlocuteurs précédents l'ont déjà bien souligné. Et donc, une des missions que nous avons à la société dès la création, c'est de s'engager dans la coopération internationale. Donc, nous sommes engagés dans la coopération depuis déjà plus de 20 ans. Et nos projets, donc, ils visent à faciliter justement l'accès à l'eau de qualité et à l'eau potable pour tous. Mais notre démarche, en fait, et notre expérience, notre démarche est de pouvoir partager l'expérience, de partager l'expertise, mais également d'accompagner les opérateurs publics, pas seulement les grands opérateurs, mais également des associations, pour essayer justement d'atteindre les différents schémas. Et notre expérience de projet donc montre qu'il faut pouvoir développer des partenariats avec tous ces acteurs et ces autorités locales, justement parce que le besoin d'appui, il est assez, il peut être différent et il n'est pas unique et peut changer en fonction des circonstances. Et donc, c'est la base pour laquelle nous déterminons donc sous quelle forme et nous pouvons donc apporter au mieux l'appui et notre expérience. Donc, nous travaillons soit juste en apportant du conseil ou nous faisons de la formation. Mais nous pouvons aussi travailler dans la prise en main au niveau des infrastructures. Le but ultime, évidemment, c'est de pouvoir améliorer les performances des entreprises que nous accompagnons, entreprises ou opérateurs ou associations. Donc, nous pouvons travailler aussi bien sur les aspects de la stratégie. Nous pouvons travailler aussi sur les aspects de gestion quotidienne, qualité de l'eau, par exemple, ou performance des réseaux. Nous pouvons travailler aussi sur les aspects de la formation directement sur le terrain ou renforcement d'une structure de formation. Et nous pouvons travailler aussi sur les aspects organisation, aspects de la gouvernance. Donc ici, nos projets s'articulent sur 2 niveaux. Et l'objectif principal, évidemment, c'est l'objectif in fine, c'est de pouvoir apporter de l'eau en continu. On l'a entendu ici, les interventions précédentes, c'est que il y a les fils, parce que l'eau n'est pas accessible, l'eau est accessible qu'1 heure ou à 3 heures du matin, et puis l'eau n'est plus accessible. Donc, nous essayons de travailler pour renforcer justement les opérateurs pour que, voilà, in fine, qu'on fournisse de l'eau et de l'eau en continu justement pour permettre cet accès qui, in fine, peut dégager du temps pour que les personnes ayant le plus la charge d'eau, comme nous avons entendu ici, les femmes et les enfants, puissent être dégagées de cette charge et alors avoir du temps pour pouvoir le consacrer à d'autres activités aussi importantes que sont justement l'éducation et la santé. Donc, je parlais des 2 niveaux d'intervention, intervention au niveau des grandes structures opérateurs publics, mais intervention aussi au niveau des petites structures, associations d'utilisateurs, structures locales, qui poursuit évidemment le même but général, c'est fourniture d'eau en continu, mais également mettre en place des modèles qui peuvent être viables, des modèles économiquement viables et durables, qui peuvent justement perdurer sur le long terme pour ne pas justement retomber dans ces aspects où, par exemple, voilà, on met en place une structure, on investit dans une infrastructure et quelques temps après, l'infrastructure ne marche plus et alors, voilà, c'est le retour à la case départ. Et donc, nous voyons que, en soulignant justement cet aspect de la mise en place des investissements, le développement en matière d'eau et d'assainissement est très important parce que sans eau potable, justement, on ne sait pas, on n'a pas les conditions d'hygiène minimales. Et quand on n'a pas les conditions d'hygiène minimales, quand on veut y parvenir, évidemment, c'est des obstacles pour pouvoir mettre en place d'autres aspects qui sont plus importants au niveau de la vie aussi, que sont l'éducation et la santé. Alors, comment nous envisageons dans le futur? Nous apportons en fait un support, nous apportons l'appui, nous accompagnons sur des aspects techniques, sur des aspects formation, mais nous pensons que c'est très important de pouvoir mettre en place plusieurs acteurs, les acteurs qui sont impliqués dans l'eau. Ce que je veux dire par là, c'est que dans la gestion du cycle de l'eau que nous pensons doit rester une responsabilité publique, il faut mettre dans le chaînon les différents acteurs qui peuvent y contribuer, qui peuvent y travailler. Par exemple, quand on met en place un projet, il y a les aspects gouvernance, il y a les aspects stratégie, il y a les aspects formation et il y a les aspects investissement. Il faut tenir compte de tout ce chaînon au niveau de la mise en place pour que justement, on ne se cantonne pas seulement à mettre en place un investissement et puis qu'il y ait plus d'aspects, mais tenir compte du fait qu'au bout de la chaîne, il faut renforcer les compétences, il faut pouvoir réguler pour que justement la mise en place de tous ces investissements puisse être durable et puisse in fine profiter et mettre en place pour que la fourniture d'eau puisse se mettre de manière continue et de manière durable. Voilà. C'était ma modeste contribution justement à cette question d'apporter de l'eau pour tous, et spécialement pour les filles et les femmes. Merci pour votre attention.
Thank you very much for presenting us the Valois Water Company. I just came back from Belgium. I'm amazed for the beauty of the country. And also I was amazed for the very nice website you have. I saw the traffic light where you can put red, green, yellow, or green to let people know about quality of water. I think there is many interesting things we can discuss after later on. Now I would like to open the floor to all of you and to discuss maybe another issues. One of them, it seems for me really important, and is related to my dissertation, is about the community water management. Community water management to address human right to water seem for me relevant because this model of organizations of provider of water are mostly in rural and peri-urban areas all around the world. My expertise is in Latin America. And it's important because through this model, many vulnerable populations are receiving water. And it wasn't the objective of my dissertation to address gender perspective in general. But when I collected data and after a while when I analyzed them, seems to me that we cannot address human right to water without a gender perspective. And seems to me also we cannot talk about water governance if we don't address gender issues. That I saw in my experience, especially in my research, is we know, and all of you talk about when the water crisis come or when we have some lack to access to water, who most suffer are the women and girls, because traditionally have to flex the water. And Sareen told us a really amazing story about this situation in Africa region. But what I found in my dissertation is an amazing role of the rural woman. It's this empowerment of the woman in the rural areas. It seems to me relevant to talk about this role of the women, especially in rural areas or in peri-urban areas, because when the women are empowered on the water sector, brings them to be active and empowered in other issues. I saw women who were empowered managing the water of the community, and then also really active in the decision making on the school, in the church, in the market, in every activity around the community. I think it's important to discuss about this active role, because in this model of management, they discuss in assembly, in meetings, about the price of the water. They put to the community into consideration how much the water should cost. And they are really concerned about the quality of water. The women want that their children, their family, neighbors drink water with a great quality, no? And that's in this conception, I saw women not just a victim of one of the really suffering of this condition around water, but empowering themselves and the whole community about water. And that brings to us that Leo Heller already a little bit discussed about democracy. No? We cannot think about the democracy if we don't address gender. We cannot think about democracy if we don't address accountability. Accountability that has to be discussed in the whole community. And I will bring this topic to you. I don't know if Pedro Arrojo would like to start the discussion, because he knows my work, and also because he has this really important mandate as a special relator of human rights to water and sanitation.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think you have explained. Everyone has explained. I think this importance. I remember an experience in Mexico. There was a very interesting social fight of the Masawa communities, indigenous Masawa communities, in defense of their water when they had to confront scarcity, because most of the water in their regions was exported with transferred to Mexico City. So at the beginning it was a rebellion of the whole communities under the leadership of the men. And then in the moment there were violence, of course, police arrived. The women took the leadership of the fight. But the most interesting, and they finally they win the fight. They made a big march to Mexico City, were received massively by Mexico citizens, and they won. But I remember talking with them. They said, well, after the struggle for water with this nonviolent strategy, they explained that their leadership in the context, in the conquest of water, gave them social and family authority. You know, that they were considered not just for water, but for many other things. So it was very interesting to understand. They said, well, mi marido, my husband, didn't respect me before, but now I am a comandante Masawa. I am a woman that had made the leadership of the community in water, and so I am respected by my husband. I'm in the family. I'm respected in the community. So it's very important. I used to say, when women are in charge of these kind of fights, usually the fight has the profile and the perspective of winning really the reivindication. But I think, yes, it's very important, and you have explained everything. Women are not just not only the 50% of the population, but they're the ones who are in charge of dealing with these questions in the communities where we have more problems for achieving the human right to safe drinking water and sanitation. So it's not just to have the responsibility, but to have also the leadership. Because as I think it was Leo Hiller, one of you, said, it will make the difference when you, for instance, someone design a project on sanitation. If women are involved, I'm sure with this perspective, the result will be completely different and positive, much more positive and interesting.
Thank you very much, Pedro Arrojo. And somebody else would like to add some comments. Karina, por favor, te escuchamos. Y de hecho, Karina, tomo la palabra nuevamente para agregar que un sindicato tan poderoso como en el que vos estás, en la ciudad de Buenos Aires, una de las capitales más pobladas en Latinoamérica, en un mundo dominado por hombres, porque yo vengo también de la práctica trabajando con ingenieros en el sector de agua. Estoy muy curiosa que además nos agregues tu experiencia como mujer en un sindicato de trabajadores del agua. No te escuchamos, Karina. Tampoco. I don't know, we lose Karina.
She's coming back.
Now she's again with us, I think. Karina, te escuchamos. No está funcionando tu micrófono.
¿Me escuchan ahora?
Ahora sí.
Ahora sí, perfecto. Bueno, muchísimas gracias, Elida, y muy enriquecedora esta charla, sumamente enriquecedora. Me encantaría quedarme todo el tiempo hasta el final. Pero antes de retirarme, por el compromiso que les conté, me gustaría primero contarles de cara a la experiencia que tengo en nuestra actividad cuando empezamos con el espacio de género hace 8 años atrás. Y desde ese lugar armamos un plan estratégico integral que miraba a la mujer desde todos sus intereses en el mundo del trabajo, la necesidad de darles mayor participación desde el momento mismo en el cual buscamos trabajadoras y trabajadores, o sea, en el recruitment, y también de cara a su desarrollo de carrera, de cara a cómo ayudarlas a mantenerse en el trabajo, cuando todas sabemos las mujeres que enfrentamos también esta necesidad de poder compatibilizar, de hacer compatible nuestros roles en lo privado, en lo personal, como estudiantes, como madres, como jefas de familia, y además agregarle nuestro trabajo diario en el ámbito laboral. Entonces, desde allí generamos muchísimas líneas de acción y logramos realmente aumentar la participación femenina, que antes era, hace 10 años atrás prácticamente no teníamos mujeres o teníamos muy pocas, y hoy somos casi un 25% de mujeres, y estamos encarando un plan hacia la igualdad en los cargos jerárquicos y en los roles no tradicionales al género. Estamos lanzando cursos técnicos para mujeres para que puedan insertarse en aquellos oficios que históricamente ejercieron únicamente nuestros compañeros hombres. Esto de cara a nuestro trabajo en el sindicato. Pero yo quería agregar algo en realidad, algo a lo que contaba antes nuestro compañero cuando él hablaba del tema de la importancia de las lideresas ambientales. Y yo quería contar una historia de una compañera, una persona. Ella es una maestra, se llama Claudia Leguizamón. Me gustaría que después la googleen. El diario, uno de los diarios, de los periódicos más importantes de Argentina, habló sobre ella, catalogándola como la maestra que le cambió la vida al barrio, la guardiana de la cuenca. Esta maestra era una maestra de 5º grado en un primario, en una de las zonas más vulnerables del país, a la vera del riachuelo, del Matanza Riachuelo, uno de los ríos más contaminados del planeta. Quería contarles esta historia. Esta maestra un día entró a clases y no podía dar clases porque sobre su escritorio había 2 niños que se estaban golpeando, que se peleaban. Había muchísima agresividad, muchísimo enojo en esos niños del 5º grado en esa escuela a la vera del riachuelo. Esta maestra se interesó por tratar de ver por qué los chicos estaban tan enojados. Y haciéndoles corta la historia, se dio cuenta a través de dibujos por los cuales ellos pudieron expresar su enojo, que estos niños habían perdido hermanitos o hermanitas por culpa de la contaminación ambiental a la que estaban expuestos. Muchos tenían plomo en la sangre, ellos tomaban agua contaminada del riachuelo, a su vez no tenían cloacas en ese momento. Entonces, cuando esta maestra descubrió lo que pasaba con estos niños, generó un plan educacional que se llama Los Guardianes de la Cuenca Matanza Riachuelo. Esta maestra convirtió el enojo de esos niños en una acción positiva para el barrio, los sacó a la calle, hicieron un relevamiento de los basurales a cielo abierto, hicieron un relevamiento de cuáles eran los problemas ambientales que los aquejaban y pensaron estrategias para solucionarlos junto con los chicos. Esta maestra se enteró que en Argentina había una causa, un juicio, que es la causa Mendoza, por la contaminación del riachuelo, y pidió una audiencia junto a sus niños con la Corte Suprema de Justicia de la Nación. Ellos fueron atendidos. Los niños le preguntaron al juez si él creía que era justo que ellos y sus hermanos murieran por estar expuestos a agua contaminada, por no tener agua, por no tener cloacas. Lograron que la Corte los escuche y que ordenase el saneamiento del barrio y la ayuda a estas poblaciones. Empezaron a hacer exámenes de salud a los niños para poder tratar sus afecciones, las afecciones derivadas de la contaminación a la que estaban expuestos. Y estos niños salieron a limpiar el barrio y salieron a concientizar a sus padres y a sus vecinos de que había que limpiar los basurales, de cómo se debían disponer los residuos. Y con la ayuda de la Corte y de empresas, lograron realmente realizar una reconversión de ese barrio, de esa escuela. Limpiaron antes la plaza de juegos de los niños donde ellos jugaban, era un gran basural y tenían un tobogán y cuando los niños se tiraban, habían puesto una alfombra para no caer arriba de la basura. Los niños, con ayuda de los grandes, limpiaron toda la plaza, plantaron arbolitos, y hoy esa plaza es un lugar realmente de esparcimiento para los nenes. Esta mujer, esta lideresa ambiental, consiguió una revolución, consiguió algo fantástico. Entonces, nada, no quería dejar de contar esta historia, porque creo que hacia todo esto de lo que estamos hablando, ¿no? Y me parece que sí, que las mujeres podemos realmente marcar la diferencia junto a los compañeros hombres, ¿no? Es todas y todos, pero el empuje que tenemos y la sensibilidad hacia estos temas realmente es muy importante. Era esto. Gracias.
Gracias, Karina. Thank you very much because you were sharing with us also a good practice from the community water management, because as Pedro Arrojo already said, we cannot think about access to water as a human right if we don't see global the ecosystem, the contamination of our resources. I think is relevant. Now I would like to hear more from Sareen, Malik. I was really amazed to discover this African Civil Society Network, and
Thank you, Elida.
the organization that comprehends 26 African countries and 50 organizations is a big challenge to be working on. And I would like to know about how you are working to widen the gap between the participation of the woman and the men in these NGOs, because you are an umbrella for NGO working on water and sanitation, as I understood.
Thank you, Elida, and thank you for the compliments. We actually started at the strategic point. We reviewed our strategic plan last year and made sure that women and girls, and of course issues of gender generally, were well captured and mainstreamed within our strategic objectives and within our goals in the next 10 years. By doing so, we are mobilizing the civil society organizations to increase their uptake on gender issues in the water sector. This means in terms of how they're doing their programming, the messages that are actually being put out, but we have, well, what we would call the black swan right now, which I think is the Sex for Water program, which really changed a bit the narrative around women and girls in the water sector, because it brought in another dimension into the picture. I can assure you, Elida, it has not been easy trying to get it legitimized, to try and get it recognized. We did so, of course, by doing a number of studies, peer reviewing them, raising awareness over the past couple of years, the countless documentaries that we have been producing to try and shed light on the issue of SGBV and women and girls and water, trying to strengthen the argument around it, what it looks like. And it's like really like peeling layers of an onion. Every time you think you understood something, there's something else, I think, that comes up. And I think, as Leo mentioned, there's that entire life cycle of a woman and what happens during those various, those different type of life cycles. Aside that, on the continent, over the past 1 year, we have been seeing a lot of activities within the sector practitioners, particularly women in the water sector. Because as an African, we say that we're not a single story, as quoted by the famous author. And by that, I mean that when we talk about women in WASH, yes, it's the yellow jerry can that we're trying to sort out, remove that jerry can, but there's also engineers. They're also managing directors of utilities. They are a number of women that are involved in the water sector at the professional level and at a very competent level, whose faces we're equally trying to bring to increase visibility on, to let them know that these are the very many faces that we have in the water sector. It's just not that one face. There are many others. And now, for example, the counselors being brought on board, which are equally women. So really trying to have the women, push the women, mentor the women equally at the professional level to take more charge and to look at those designs and those plans. I think it was mentioned by the previous speakers, the way a man designs the toilet is not the same way. It does not respond to the woman's, necessarily to the woman's need. We see it in informal settlements across the continent, where you go to a sanitation facility. The door is not properly hinged. There's a big gap somewhere, and you just know this is a guy that built this. There cannot possibly be a woman that actually designed this, in terms of the distance between the taps or the changing areas versus the showering areas or the sanitation facilities. So it's been a combination of activities and interventions that the network has generally been working on, partners have generally been working on, even within our own knowledge management component, because ANEW hosts the Susanna Africa Regional Chapter. The Susanna Africa Regional Chapter really has the focus on women and girls in WASH. So really getting all the civil society organization practitioners share your experiences. Because Elida, more and more, we keep talking about the decolonization of WASH. What does that mean? That Southern voices must take more prominence and that a seat at the table, yes, but also in terms of sharing some of the knowledge that we have from the ground and bringing it to the table. So it's a mishmash of things, but hopefully something that will yield some positive results. Thank you, Elida.
You are welcome, and I wish we could have more time to discuss the whole evening here. I just want to be equal also with women and men here, and because
Yes.
I give it now the floor to Leo Heller, I would like to hear more about this accountability, because I read this report and it was really important for my dissertation. But be sure, please, Leo, because I want to hear also Minasola and about. I'm curious about the international cooperation of the Wallois company. Please, Leo.
Okay, just to highlight this issue of gender after 2016, that was the year of my report, is following me all the time. I'm now, in few months, I will launch a book, and there is a chapter on gender equality. My research now, even if the research is not directly on gender, always the gender dimension appears. For instance, one of my students is researching the access to water and sanitation in prisons. Then the gender dimension appears. When one of my students worked on rural workers, the gender inequality appears, and so on and so forth. Your question about accountability for me is very important. It's another principle of the human rights to water and sanitation. And when we combine accountability with gender inequality, we will see the responsibility of the public actors, not only the public, also the private, but mainly the public actors, to look at this dimension in monitoring, in giving information, in opening spaces for participation, in creating roles and responsibilities in all the bodies responsible for providing services, for regulating services. So it's very important when we think on accountability to use the gender dimension as a cross-cutting issue to inform all the activities and all the responsibilities related to that. So I think accountability is an entry point, maybe, for addressing well the gender inequality in the water and sanitation sector.
Thank you, Leo. Minasola, can you share with us the international cooperation problem of the Wallois Water Company? Because I think it's a key thinking about the cooperation to address the human right to water, because as we know that in the developing country, they cannot do it without the support of the strongest countries and the strongest water operators.
Exactement, merci Elida. Je veux embrayer en fait par rapport à ce que M. Heller vient de dire, justement cette question de responsabilité. Même si nous n'intervenons pas directement dans les aspects genre, mais nous avons une responsabilité, nous devons nous engager quand même quand nous mettons en place des projets à pouvoir le penser de manière transversale. C'est ce que vraiment nous essayons de faire. Donc, on ne contribue pas de manière directe, mais de manière indirecte. En mettant en place des projets, il faut qu'in fine, cela puisse profiter aussi, justement, puisse profiter aux filles et aux femmes. Donc, mettre en avant cet aspect genre qui est très, très, très important. Donc, quand nous mettons en place les projets, indirectement, donc comme je viens de dire, dans les aspects, aussi bien les formations, aussi bien les aspects techniques, nous essayons en fait de mettre au centre le public cible, et c'est en fait en travaillant aussi dans ce public cible que nous devons intégrer cette dimension. Donc nous faisons quand même attention quand nous travaillons avec nos partenaires de pouvoir intégrer justement tout le monde, de pouvoir faire attention dans les différents aspects, que voilà, qu'il n'y ait pas cet aspect discriminatoire, ou que voilà, que ça soit vraiment intégrant pour tout le monde, y compris donc justement pour pouvoir résoudre cet aspect genre. Et je voudrais insister par rapport donc à la proposition, enfin à la conclusion que j'avais fait donc précédemment pour ma présentation, pour dire que justement il faut essayer de travailler de manière intégrée pour mettre en place des projets structurants. Comme j'ai dit, donc il faut intégrer les différents partenaires dans les programmes. Donc il y a des aspects gouvernance, il y a les aspects investissement, mais il faut qu'il y ait aussi les aspects sensibilisation. Il faut que ça soit vraiment tout un chaînon dans la mise en place des projets pour que justement qu'on puisse tenir compte de ces aspects, comme je dis, transversaux qui sont très importants dans la mise en place des projets. Nous sommes opérateurs, nous intervenons évidemment dans cet aspect, des aspects peut-être formation, mais si dans tout le programme qui a été mis en place, on intègre aussi bien en amont la régulation, la gouvernance, mais en aval la sensibilisation, je pense que voilà, la mise en place des programmes pourrait bien intégrer en tout cas tous les aspects, y compris justement ces aspects genre. Voilà.
Thank you so much, Mina Sola, for sharing us your experiences. And we have 2 minutes left. I would like to thank you all for your participation. I have so many other questions. I hope I had the chance to share with you again. But I think it will be nice to hear from you the last remark of this session. Thank you so much for my side.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay, because
yes.
Okay, great. So yes, it could be much more longer actually, because it's a very interesting discussion. I'm very honest when I say that, because for us it was very important to start this Congress with this topic, and I'm very glad that so many insightful prospective vision ideas were brought in this session. And maybe you noticed that it was by purpose we choose more women than men in that session, because as some speakers mentioned, it's too much male-dominated sector, and I experienced that in my former life in Paris. I'm sorry for Pedro and Leo and the other men. I'm not against men, but there are two men in this sector, and I think it's one of the reasons why this gender dimension and gender equality in water and sanitation sector is not enough estimated, studied, and managed. So thank you so much. Many interesting points have been raised about democratic challenge, of course, the participation and participation of women in decision-making process, and decolonization also, and intersectionality for this topic, and how we can have this gender dimension as a cross-cutting issue in all policies, all programs, all I don't know how, policies and all related water and sanitation related programs and ID and conferences and so on. So because we have now, the time is over. So first of all, I would like to tell you that we have the possibility to share many reports, documents, experiences, paper, everything in embedded resources. So I think it could be very useful to share among us, but also with others. This any kind of documents about this issue. So we have this opportunity. And also, I would like to thank you again, all the speakers, and to finish this session with a little video of a GWOPA, just to close this session. And I really hope that we can have a follow-up of this session in I don't know when exactly, but in the coming weeks and months. Thank you very much. And thank you, Elida, for your moderation role.
Thank you to you and to you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now,
What?
Evie.
Already over? No, we have plenty more options to continue the discussions and peer exchange beyond the Congress.
Tell me more. What are the options?
Well, GWOPA membership, for example. By becoming a member of GWOPA, everyone can connect to a global alliance of practitioners and experts. There are two ways of becoming a member. First, institutional members. Institutions can participate in GWOPA's assemblies and are eligible to run and vote in its international steering committee elections. Or second, individual members. Individuals can connect and engage with peers in the online GWOPA community. We have created a space that allows for networking and easy communication. Meet future GWOPA partners, stay up to date on project opportunities, and participate in peer-to-peer learning opportunities.
Sounds great. How can I join?
Simply go to www.gwwopa.org and register for free. If you want to know more, you can follow GWOPA on social media and subscribe to the newsletter. Thanks for joining the 4th Global TOPS Congress. We'll see you soon.